Awesome. Well, before I begin, I just want to say a quick thank you to the BMCAA for throwing this event. This is such a great idea, and I've been already learning so much. I'm super happy to be a part of it. I want to say thank you to the other presenters as well for sharing their knowledge. And I have to give a huge thanks to my team at TVASurg, who are the most amazing people. And I am so grateful to be able to work with them. So without further ado, I'm going to start up my talk. It's packed with info. So if I'm moving too fast, just let me know and we can take a pause. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Paul Kelly from TVASurg here with the BMC Alumni Association. We're going to be doing a BM class on DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is one of the most powerful free software applications out there for video editing and color grading, but it also has a ton of robust features for audio editing and compositing as well. There's a paid version of DaVinci, still a decent price of $300 USD, with additional features such as multiple GPU support, motion blur effects, 3D stereoscopic tools, and collaboration tools that let multiple users work on the same project at the same time. One of the great things about DaVinci is, similar to Blender, Blackmagic keeps all their old versions of the software accessible. So whatever system you've got, you can find a compatible version by visiting their support page. After installing, open the software and select New Project and name it. Once Resolve is open, you will see tabs along the bottom that follow a left to right workflow: Media, Cut, Edit, Fusion, Color, Fairlight, and Deliver. These are referred to often as pages in documentation around DaVinci Resolve. And even though they're laid out in a recommended order of operations, you can jump back and forth between each of these. There's no defined path that you have to follow. Some things you may want to know before you bring in any footage is you can set the dimensions and frame rate for your project in the project settings. So click on the gear icon in the lower right or use File, Project Settings. The most important things you probably want to be aware of are the video frame rate. They have the default frame rate for a lot of these projects as 24 frames per second, and you probably want to set that to 29.97. Another useful thing to be aware of is the annotation. For group projects, this can be really helpful. So check out File, Project Notes, and you can add notes for your other teammates or even just for yourself when you want to come back to a project after a while. If you go to File, Media Management, you can convert files from one file type to another. This can be really useful for certain projects you want to change the file formats. And then also, always with any kind of editing program, you're going to want to know where to find the history. So in Edit, History, you can find your history steps there. When working in the Edit or Fairlight pages, you can add flags or markers to help with organizing key points in your timeline. The difference being a flag will mark an entire clip, whereas a marker will mark an exact frame. Once added, if you double click on a marker, you can give it a name or add notes, and if you double click on a flag, you can add notes. While editing, you can search through the markers in the Edit page by going to the three dots in the upper right of the source monitor, go to Markers, and you'll see all your markers on the active timeline. You can also assign colors to clips in your timeline by right-clicking and then selecting Clip Color, which helps to visually organize your edit as well. You can also use markers to indicate chapters or segments when your video is uploaded to YouTube. All right, so let's walk through a demonstration of using DaVinci Resolve for a real-world practical example. What I'm going to do is rebuild a recent AMI Salon cut. So for the AMI Salon, we submit 3-minute videos of animation. So that often involves us having to cut back on footage. So I'm going to create a video here, do 21 Salon example. So create a new project. And so I'm going to be starting out here in the Cut tab, but I actually want to navigate over to my media. I'm going to go into my folder structure. I'm going to find, where was it? I think we had it in AMI. Here we go. and I'm going to grab that uncompressed raw footage. So I'm going to grab whatever assets I need from my folder located on my drive, and I have to bring them into the media pool in DaVinci so that they can be accessed by the software. This is, quite similar to After Effects or Premiere. You have to actually bring the assets in. So now that it's there, I can go to the cut page, and the cut page is sort of to help you get just a really rough cut of the first pass of a video. So I only have this one asset, but you might have a lot of clips in here, even some audio or still frames. And what's great about the cut page is it keeps everything really simple and streamlined for you. So if I click on the thumbnail to bring it up in the viewport here, or the source monitor, I can hover over the video and that will allow me to scrub. And if I hit Shift S, that will activate the audio, but I probably don't want to do that. What's cool though is I know I just want to grab the animation intro to the video. We're not interested in including footage because for the AMI videos, that's just way too long. So I'm gonna, while hovering over the video, having it active in the viewport, I'm gonna hit I, and that will activate the in point. And then I'm gonna scrub over here to where the intro ends. And then I'm gonna hit O, and that's gonna be my out point. And so now with my in and out point set, I can drag the demo clip into the timeline here, and you see that automatically created a new timeline. So a timeline in DaVinci is the same thing as like a comp in After Effects or a sequence in Premiere. I can also go up to File and create a new timeline that way, or just hit Control N. But now that it's been created, I can navigate through here by holding Control and using the mouse. That's Control on the PC, it would be Command on the Mac, and I'm using the scroll wheel to scrub through the video. Now this might take me a while to get to where I need to go, so I can also click on the timeline above the video clips. This view here is giving me a bird's eye view of my entire timeline. So I know that there's certain points right here. Here's a transition where we've got some chapter titles and we're not going to need those. So I'm going to end up cutting these guys out. And to do that, I can click on the split clips icon here, but that's a little cumbersome. So I'm going to do Control B for blade, and that's going to cut the clip right there. If I click on the playhead and drag, that will also move me forward and back over the video. And I'm going to find where the next transition is. Okay, so it looks about right there. Make my cut. So click on the timeline. Let me get to the end of the animation and the next chapter. And I just realized there's something I'm missing. So I want to have those credits from the video show up. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to select this clip. You can click and drag in the edit timeline space to select clips, and then just hit backspace. But I'm going to go back to my raw clip here because I need that, and we'll go to the end, set that in point. And now when we drag this down here, that will give us our credits. Okay, so we got a nice smooth transition at the end there. And I'm gonna delete this clip here just by hitting backspace. Now, that might actually cause a problem because the audio might cut in a little too abruptly. So I might want to separate the audio from the video, but I'll end up doing that later in the edit tab. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a transition. So if I go up to my effects, transitions, and I'm going to want to do cross dissolve. So I'm going to click and drag that in here, And as you see, that cross dissolve is picking up some of the previous, or I think it's probably the frames that this clip right before that cut happens, it's picking up those earlier frames and adding those into the dissolve. So I probably want to go back. If I hover over the dissolve, select it, hit delete, that'll take it out. If I go into this portion, Control B again to cut, select this, and then delete that. Let's see if that took it out. Still a little bit of that text showing up, so I might have to fine tune this in the edit. So in this timeline, again, I'm gonna hold Control. Sorry, if I hold Control in the edit page and scroll back and forth, I'm gonna move back and forth. But if I hold Alt and scroll, then I can zoom in on my timeline. And so now I've got additional controls. If I click and drag the audio, now I can see the waveform much better. And if I click this line in the middle, that's a very quick volume adjustment. But I'm going to want to end up taking advantage of some better features in Fairlight at a later time. Right now, I just want to try and settle this transition that's taking place. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to pull this forward a little bit in time, pull it back. Okay, yeah. So that cut where the transition is taking place is a little too abrupt. So how to solve that? So what I can do is actually grab a little bit of this first frame, Control B, slice that. I'm going to pull this back so that I can just kind of work with it for a second here. And now I'm going to right click and I'm going to go change clip speed, and let's make this a freeze frame. So change that. So now that just gives us a frame to play with. So I can drag that out a little bit. Now let's try our transition. There we go. Nice. Okay, that's much cleaner. I can also drag out that transition to have it take place a little bit longer. And now again we have that audio that got cut out, so I'm going to pull that forward in time. And now if I click on the space in this gap here and I hit backspace, that'll take back my footage. But a lot of the times when I want to be editing, I don't want to always have to be clicking over to the keyboard. So there's a couple tricks here to do these edits quickly. Generally for these AMI videos, what we end up having to do is eliminate as much of the dead space as possible. Just to let you know, the shortcuts for the selection tool are A, and if I hit B, I do get a blade tool, and that will allow me to hover over the footage and make cuts directly. But to be honest, I haven't really been using that tool as much lately because I've found some other tools that are a bit more helpful. Now you'll notice that wherever the playhead is positioned over the footage, it's selecting that footage. Now that functionality is not activated by default, but if you go to edit, timeline, I've got selection follows playhead activated. That's not active by default, but it's a really great function to have activated, because now wherever I navigate to, that becomes my active clip. So I don't really need to use the selection tool all that much. I can just hover over where I need to be, and then I can use delete, the delete key on my keyboard, to do a ripple delete, and that will remove that clip and then pull everything back. Or I can do with this clip selected, I can do Control Shift X, and that will also do a ripple delete, and it will store that clip in my recent memory, so I can paste that back in another spot. So I'm going to continue to go along through this clip, find these spaces of dead air, Control B, Shift Command X. And a lot of the navigation I've been doing using that control and scroll wheel. It's also helpful to use the arrow keys. As I start to add in more cuts, I can use the up arrow to move back by each clip location, or down to move forward. And then the right and left arrow keys will move forward and back one frame at a time. If I hold Shift and hit the arrow keys, they'll jump forward and backwards by, I think it's like 3-second increments. So that's also a helpful way to navigate through the timeline. All right, so now what if I'm making some edits and I get, some feedback and somebody says, oh, we should really move this section that's further down in the timeline to a spot earlier, because these two sections are both dealing with the cross-sectional anatomy. They should really go together. So let's rearrange that. So if I click and drag this clip, it's going to overwrite whatever it's laying on top of, and that's not what I want. I want to be able to pull this piece out and have it shove everything past this point, right? So what I can do is I can take this out using my Control-Shift-X ripple delete, or Command-Shift-X on the Mac, and then to place it back in here, I'm going to do Control-Shift-V to paste, and that's an insert paste, and that will shove everything in front of it forward, and so that way I'm not overwriting any of the footage. Another helpful hotkey to be aware of right now, you notice that the playhead is snapping to that cut location. I might want it to do that or not want it to, so to toggle that functionality, can go up here to the magnet and turn snapping on and off, or use N, the hotkey N. Because sometimes you really want to grab like that one last frame at the end of a clip. Now let's say I make my cut here and here, and I want to bring back that footage. Well, what I can do is drag the space in between where the cut was made, and that will allow me to pull out that clip, and that's going to overwrite the clip next to it. So in this instance, I'll just pull it back and make some space. All right, but now let's say I want to add in some footage back into a spot, but I don't have anything to paste into that location. Like let's say this clip, I just want to push it down, but I don't want to overwrite the next clip. So what I can do is, if I've highlighted this clip and I hit Y, it's going to select everything past it. That's a little bit hard to see, so let's zoom out. So I'm selected on this clip and I hit Y. That's going to select everything in the timeline past the location of the playhead. And then that way, when I move this forward, I know I've got everything with me and I'm not overwriting anything. Now, one of the things that the cut page is really helpful with is it gives this overview of the whole video, as I mentioned. And so as you start to add in cuts, if you're starting with one long piece of footage, it's not telling you much, but if you have a lot of cuts throughout here, what you can do is highlight certain sections. So I know all the way here at the beginning, maybe I made some cuts in the intro as well, try to trim that down to length. So I might assign this a color. And then at the very end, similar, I may assign this a color as well. And so in the edit page, that bird's eye view, I can see those colors of different segments. So in the middle of the story, I might have like a sequence here and then another sequence later. So this will allow me to keep visual organization of the edits that I'm making. Now, a few things to be aware of with markers and with selections and navigation in general. When I want to place a marker, it's going to automatically go onto the clip if it's actively selected. But if that's not what I want, if I want the marker to be up in the timeline, I just have to make sure nothing is selected. And if I click in this empty space above the clips, then it will deactivate all my selections and the marker will go up here now. And markers are good because they're a placeholder that's independent of where an edit cut has been. So what I can do is, if I'm placing markers throughout the footage in different spots and making notes to myself, I can hit the same way I was using the up and down arrows to jump from cut point to cut point. If I hit shift and up and down, that will jump from marker to marker. Another useful editing feature is, rather than the select tool, if you go over here to the trim edit mode or hit T, if you click and drag on a clip, it will slide that forward and backwards through the timeline. So you can move it to adjust to maybe remove the little bits of audio on the either end of the clip, if that's what that shot calls for. Also, if I want to change my view of the source monitor, if I want to get a closer look, I can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And if I press and hold the middle mouse button and drag around, I can pan the image. Now, if I have a portion of my edit that I want to change the transform properties of, I can go up here in the inspector. And this is going to give me my zoom controls, position, rotation, anchor point, all that good stuff. The inspector is basically the same as the effect controls panel in Premiere, where you have control over the position, scale, rotation, and you can keyframe each of these attributes. In DaVinci, it's over here on the upper right. Now, if I wanted to mask off a clip, I could do that with the cropping. So I could drag in from either side, top, bottom. And now to undo all those changes, I can click on these arrow circle icons next to each of those attributes, and that'll reset them. If I click and drag the sliders for each of my tracks, I can make the thumbnails larger or smaller. If I click on the line in between the video and audio tracks, I can shift those up and down if I have multiple audio and video. And to add more audio or video, I'm just going to right click in this space and add tracks. And it'll be the same for audio here as well. Except with audio, you're going to have to indicate whether it's a mono or stereo track. And so just a few more little tricks. And so if I want to put something on this track, let's say I want to put like a still image on there. So I'll go back to my media pool, and let's say I want to put an AMI logo. Drop that into my media pool, go back to my edit. I can find my AMI logo here, and I can place a still image on a track just as you would any piece of footage, and then you can basically just drag that out infinitely if it's a still image, the same way as in Premiere or After Effects. And now I can use the cropping tools here. Say, change the blending mode. It's like maybe a watermark or something. Now, also one last thing while I'm editing, sometimes I'm using the Playhead to kind of navigate through and see things changing in the video. If I hit the L key, that is going to speed up the Playhead. If I keep tapping it, it's just going to keep speeding it up. And then if I hit K, that will slow it back down again. So those are the editing tools I use most often for navigation and for editing. And I hope you find those helpful.
All right. So I'm going to just pause the video right here. That was a lot of information. So I just wanted to give everyone a chance for Q&A if there was any questions anybody want to ask.
Are you going to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just had several questions.
Sure.
So you mentioned earlier that there was team functionality that multiple people could work on it at a time.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Is there like a shared platform? Can you work on the same file?
So that is the paid version of DaVinci, which unfortunately we don't have as of yet. I think we might be investing in that though. So unfortunately, I can't give you like a good answer on that, but I think it's probably like a local server kind of situation. But yeah, definitely something to investigate. And sorry, I can't give you a better answer on that.
No, that's fine. Thank you. And then I also just had a question about some of the audio capabilities. Does it also have like audio cleanup tools or audio editing tools as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I got a whole section on audio coming up in a bit. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. And is it only for video, or like if you had render layers, you could composite them as well?
That's we're going to be covering next. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. No problem.
You read ahead in the book, Judy. Speaking of notes, Paul, will you be providing any kind of like you've ran through a lot of like hotkeys and sort of tips and tricks really quick through those shortcuts. Is that something you'd be able to, like, is there a companion sheet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is. In fact, here it is. There's a link in the chat right there. That is the entire script for today's presentation. So you're all free to jump on there and go through that. And feel free to leave me comments or anything on the doc as well.
And at this point, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really, when everyone hops in there, you'll see how many notes there are indeed. What would you say is like how would you compare it to, what am I trying to ask here? I had it in my head and now I've forgotten. How does it compare to After Effects and or Premiere in that, like, what would you like better about this over those two in terms of functionality or like sort of how it works, interface, anything like that?
Sure. So a few things. One is that there are some benefits to still using Premiere and After Effects. And I actually, even when I started using DaVinci, I still do use both of those tools. Some of the things that After Effects does better, for example, would be any of the kind of motion graphics work. I know a lot of folks like to just draw using like the anchor point tools directly in After Effects. DaVinci, it might have some of those functions, but they're not as robust, I think. So there are some things that After Effects still does better, I think. Also, there is one like major complaint a lot of people have about DaVinci, which is that you can't really undock any of the components of the UI. Everything is kind of stuck where it is. You can close tabs, you can close them and reshape them, move them around, but you can't undock anything. That's one of like the number one gripes that people who use DaVinci complain about. But there are some really cool dual monitor features. So you can actually have like two different working spaces with the same software project open. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that I really like about and the reason why I still do use Premiere and After Effects is that because they're both Adobe products, they sync together really well. So you can have an After Effects project, and if you have like both of those windows open, you can literally take like a comp out of After Effects and drag it on your screen into the Premiere window, drop it in there, and it will become like a linked comp in Premiere, and vice versa. But don't do both, because if you have like I've done that before, it was so silly. But if you have like a recursive, like a Premiere project is referencing an After Effects project, which is also referencing the Premiere project, it will get caught in a loop, and you both programs will crash anytime you try to open it. So that's a disaster. Don't do that. But the fact that you can link projects between the applications is pretty sweet, and that's one of the reasons why I still do use those. Yeah, there's I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I guess maybe DaVinci Resolve should turn to Affinity Designer for some tips on how to undock toolbars. For those who are there in the afternoon session.
Yeah.
And to answer, I guess, Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Joyce's question about MoGraph and 2D animation capabilities. Perhaps we stick with After Effects for the time being. If there are any other questions, keep them coming in the chat, or otherwise we might be ready for the next one.
Cool. Yep. Let's jump back in there. All right. So now we're going to do some really cool, exciting stuff. This is actually kind of one of the biggest inspirations I had to do this talk. So I hope you guys enjoy this.
All right. So I want to try and get something composited here in Fusion, and I've got a couple different render passes. These are saved to the EXR file format, and that allows me to have multi-pass renders. So I can have all my render passes saved to just one file. But I've actually been encountering an issue with Arnold lately, which I'm not sure which render engine you're using, but it's probably because my Arnold is out of date. Basically, I don't have a separate alpha pass when I render out all my multi-passes. But I have been using this plugin system called Cryptomat to render out my object buffers or my object mats, and that has allowed me to build an alpha pass in a separate set of passes. So what I'm going to do is show you how I've been able to build up a composited shot here in Fusion, the Fusion tab of DaVinci Resolve. So this is a completely free compositing software, node-based, and I'm going to build my shot. So let's get in there and do it now. So if I drag this in, I'm going to get a media in node, and that won't give me all the options I want for the compositing I'm going to end up doing. So instead, I'm going to use a loader node, and that's going to bring up this search window, and I'm going to pick the EXR file I want to composite. So this is the render file, and now using the loader node, I can break this apart with the HOS split EXR script that I got from Reactor. So that's going to open up this pop-up window that's a bit glitchy. Unfortunately, these buttons are not showing up, but in the lower left corner here, I can see what the text is supposed to say. So I'm going to hit OK. That's going to break that apart, and I'm going to have all my render passes. Now, these might be kind of overwhelming, but it's actually not totally necessary to have all of these. But basically, I've broken apart different elements of my composition into direct and indirect passes, and that gives me a lot of control over the bounced light, the direct light or the bounced light. So I'm going to grab all these and move them back. Ambient occlusion is going to be applied at the end. The alpha and the Z pass are going to be used but at the end as well. And the background is actually a preview of the final beauty pass render. So when I first have a look at this beauty pass, the colors are looking a bit off, and I know that this is because the color space is not correct. So in order to correct for that, what I've done is made a custom lookup table for this viewport with the color gamma set to 2.2. So I apply that to the viewport, and then it's looking the way that it should. So let me get back to building up my render passes here. So what I'm going to end up doing is using these channel Booleans to combine direct and indirect passes. And I'm going to set the operation to add.
Then you guys are going to see.
The ones I want to start out with are the
Yeah, sorry, I made a mistake there in
diffuse
the editing,
passes.
but
So
we'll
let me
keep
grab
going.
all of those. Diffuse direct, diffuse indirect. Subsurface is also going to be towards the end. The Z pass for the depth is going to be back towards the end. Okay, here we go. So diffuse albedo, diffuse albedo, diffuse direct, and diffuse indirect. This is where things are going to kind of start. And then the specular is going to get added in on top of that. And this can kind of get tedious, so I'm just going to demonstrate one group of nodes being added together, and then you can see how that'll work for all the other groups as well. All right, so the diffuse and indirect, I'm going to combine these passes using a channel Boolean node. Pipe these in together. And I'll set the operation to add, and then the alpha to do nothing. Now I'm going to combine these two passes with another channel Boolean. And then this one is going to be set to multiply. And so now if I view this, viewport, you can see it's combining that color. This color being combined, and then this is being multiplied on top of that. And basically going to repeat that operation until I get all my groups for my diffuse, specular, subsurface, and then each of these, as we move down the chain, are added, eventually bring in the ambient occlusion, which is multiplied. And then when we want to do the depth pass, we're going to actually create a group here. We're going to color correct the depth pass. So depth pass originally comes in looking like this. We're going to go to color corrector node, and in the color correction, what we've basically done is we've brought in the darkest and lightest points to squeeze this information so that it's spread across our render pass. And then we invert it, and then that's the output of the depth. So that gets combined with a, gets piped into a change depth node with the depth set to int 16, which is integer 16, and the beauty pass of all the render passes prior to the depth being applied, that is also being given a depth of integer 16. Then that's going to combine the effects, and now we can pipe that into a depth blur node. And this will allow us to add depth of field, should we so desire. Now to set up a transparent background, we're going to use that alpha pass render set that's getting piped into a cryptomat node, and the mat node is now being assigned to the crypto asset. If I use this slider for the layer index, I can choose between the asset, material, or object. And by selecting asset, I can grab the alpha for the entire pass. if I were selecting material, I could select objects in the scene based on their material. Or if I was selecting object, I could select separate objects. To build my background object, I've started with a background node, which is essentially a solid color. And then I've added in a mask node, an ellipse mask, and that's being applied to a second background of a different color, which in this case is just black. And so the first background color is being combined with the second one, which has a mask applied through the merge node. And in the merge node settings, I've just said normal operation over, and you can tweak some of the blend here. And so that entire group is just being piped out to immediate out node. And then getting the Cryptomat to actually be applied as an alpha channel to the render passes took me a little searching, but it was this alpha divide node that I eventually found to be the one to give me the result I wanted. And then after I applied a gamut node to correct for the color space, I comped those together in the edit tab. So I've got my transparent background with my color corrected render pass.
All right, and that's another probably good spot to pause for a moment. So if anyone has any questions, I will try my best to answer them. I'm definitely still learning Fusion, but if there's anything I can fill in, any gaps I can fill in there, feel free to ask.
I think it's a lot to take in. I'm just curious, how
Yeah,
long have you
sure.
been working with DaVinci Resolve again?
So I've actually probably been working with DaVinci for about total like maybe 3 years, but I've not done a whole lot with it up until more recently. So I've started to kind of learn more like all the esoteric features. And I do apologize. I actually skipped like a bunch of steps in that workflow that I just showed. So like kind of explaining what cryptomats are and the plugin that you use to split them apart. I apologize. I did end up cutting that stuff because I was just looking at the total timeline in the video, and it was going to keep us here all night. So I took that out, but all the notes are in the Google Doc. And also there is a tutorial in there by a fellow named Brandon Ark. And he basically, everything I kind of know, I learned from him. So I didn't want to like just plagiarize his whole like YouTube video, right, where he explained it. So yeah, definitely check his out. I'll see if I can find a link for his video where he breaks it all down. And he actually was using Blender. So he was rendering out in Blender and then compositing it all in DaVinci. Yeah, I'll put a link for that for his video in there. But I also have the notes for it typed up as well there.
Yeah, no, it's amazing because it has so many features and it feels like you could just get lost in it. So really impressive that you figured all of this out, and thanks for sharing it with us.
No problem. Still learning.
As we all are, of course. Any questions about this part? All right.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll
Sorry, Paul, just one more quick question.
no problem.
For node-based compositing, do you still have a capability of creating custom passes, like let's say a Z-task using a mask like you would in After Effects?
That's a good question. I hadn't tried that, but I think you could, because I think you could just pipe in, well, sort of like the way I made the background gradient. I think you could create a node or a node group in the same manner, and then you could just plug that in where you plugged in, the Z pass. So I think the input from that node would still be received, and it would still I think it would. But I'll have to do some experimenting to really give you a good answer on that. But that is a really good question.
Okay, great. Thanks. That'd be super cool.
All right. Well, I'll jump back over to the video, and now we're going to jump into the color correcting and color grading features.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at the color page, which is actually probably the most powerful aspect of DaVinci Resolve. This is kind of DaVinci's claim to fame, is their color grading and color correcting tools are unmatched in other pieces of software. Now, this is where you're going to do all your color correction and color grading. And you might wonder, well, what's the difference? Well, color correcting is adjusting your source footage to closely match how those colors should have appeared in life. This usually involves fixing the white balance, but it can also include bumping up the contrast and similar lighting and brightness adjustments to make the image just look kind of good. Color grading is applying a set of adjustments synced across multiple clips to create a look and feel. That's usually intended to add an emotional aspect to the video for storytelling. So for example, a warm tone for pleasant scenes and maybe bluish tones for depressing scenes. Sometimes they use greenish tones for like horror films or sci-fi films. So that kind of stuff. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of all the different color options you have available, if you ever have to just push out something really quickly, there is an easy button for color grading, and it's this little A on the left-hand side of your UI down in the color adjustments. And this is the auto balance button, which is just going to like automatically bump up the contrast and the saturation in the image. You might get some artifacts, so it's not perfect, but this is a quick way of getting an acceptable look. This is going to be dependent on the frame in which you applied the effect. Now there's a whole lot more to color grading, so let's dive in a bit deeper. I'm actually going to undo the auto. So in the upper right here, you'll notice we have a node tree, and this is where all your effects are going to be applied. This little dot on the left represents the source footage coming in, and then the dot on the right is the output of all your changes. And
What's going on, guys?
in today's nodes, and each node you can think of as an adjustment layer in Photoshop. So this is a set of changes being applied, and you're working non-destructively here, so anything you do, you can always delete these nodes, take them out, and you still have the original source footage here, which is unaltered. Now, to add new nodes, you're going to use Alt-S, and that'll add a serial node. This will allow you to layer up your effects, and sometimes you might want to experiment and try something in one node, and you don't want to affect everything else. Here in the color page is where you can grab still frames from your footage. So if I scrub through the footage and find a spot where I want still frame, I can right click and go grab still. And then if I navigate up to the gallery in the upper left, I'm going to find my still. And when I'm scrolling over it, it's showing me the source footage that the still came from, which I know is a little confusing, but if you activate this little before and after icon, when you scrub, it's going to show you where that still is in comparison. And if I'm moving through the footage at any point, I can still go back here. I can play still, and it's going to, if I'm moving through the footage, let's say I'm at a later point, if I go over the still and I go to play still, it's going to bring me back to where that still frame was. So that's how I can just see it. And then if I want to export that, I can just right click and go export. And that will allow me to pick a file type. This DPX might freak you out at first, but yeah, all the other file types for your images are down here. So now let's actually do some color grading. So I'm gonna go back to my footage here, and this piece of footage is a little washed out. So what I want to do is kind of darken down the dark areas and bright up the highlights, maybe bring some saturation back into the image. Now, the recommended workflow is to start with lift, go into gamma, gain, and then offset. And what each of these color wheels does is the lift will bring information, will affect the lift will affect the darkest areas of the image. the gamma will affect the mid-range, the mid-tone values. The gain will affect the brightest areas, and the offset will affect the whole image globally. Now I have these little color pickers here. I can grab this for the lift and tell it where the darkest point in the image should be. So a good spot might be right back here. So that's going to automatically tell the image where the dark value should be. And now I'll do the same for the gain. I'll grab this color picker, and I know the highlight on top of this awning here is probably the brightest part. So right there, that has helped to establish a new range for the image. And I can show you the offset. And if I tweak these sliders at the bottom here, this is going to show you how the effect is taking place mostly at the bottom of this waveform. On the bottom right, that's a great view of how the effects are being applied. And you can change this to view the color information in different forms. So the waveform will overlay the RGB values on top of one another. The vector scope has a circle orientation where the values, as they get out towards the periphery of the circle, are more towards that specific color. And if they're in the middle, they might be more of like neutral values. So now, as I'm building up more nodes, I can add a new serial node by hitting Control S, by hitting Alt S, add a new node. And these changes are being applied one after the other. So in the second node, if I decide to take the saturation down, you'll notice that in the first node, I can solo this with Command H for highlight. That will show me the effects in that node. Every node after the desaturation is going to have those effects applied to it. If I want to turn nodes on and off, I can click the numbers in the bottom. And if I want to turn all the nodes off, I can do bypass here at the top. And if I want to reset all the effects that have been applied in a node, I can right click and reset that node. Also, I can apply masks by going along the toolbar icons here. I have several different options. I have my curve modifiers. I have all these different methods of applying color adjustments. There's the color warper. If I go to window, I'll have a selection of masks I can choose from. So I can add a mask to an effect and then adjust it similar to how you would in After Effects or Premiere. Again, Command H to solo that effect, or click the number to turn it off. And then if I right click, I can reset the node. So this is the Fairlight page, which is the audio workstation component of DaVinci Resolve.
Sorry, just pause it there. And sorry, I know that again, there was a lot of information there. Did anybody have any questions?
How is this software free? Is my question.
So that is a good question. The answer is basically marketing. It's because Blackmagic, they make their money through their hardware. They're primarily a camera company, and they sell these ridiculously expensive high-end movie cinematic cameras, one of which I've just been drooling over for a while now. It's called the Pocket Cinema 6K camera. So it films, and it's like higher than 4K resolution. It's nuts. And it's the size of like a point and shoot. It's ridiculous. And then for using this software, one of the reasons why this software is free is because they have these custom keyboards that they make that allow you to have all the hotkeys for each one of these tabs on a keyboard. So you can actually have like a legit, Fairlight just panel that has all the hotkeys for that particular workflow all on one keyboard. You can have like a bunch of keyboards set up, and that's what Blackmagic sells. They sell all these pieces of hardware, so they put the software out for free so that people get hooked and want to buy all those goodies.
That makes a lot of sense. Plus, like you said, there's sort of the paid version for a few additional features like team collaboration kind of capabilities, which is also really fantastic. We are just a little over time, but I think we've got
okay.
Not a problem. We can play the last set if you do have to go. Not to worry if you have other things this evening, but we've got one more short clip I think you've prepared for the audio. We'd love to share it, so stick around if you can for another 5-7 minutes or so. And
and also I can post like the final cut of like all these video clips all like comped together. I can put that up on YouTube, so if anybody wants to check it out later.
Amazing.
Cool. All right, well let's jump back in there.
Simple audio controls like level adjustments can be done in the edit page or in the cut, but in Fairlight, you have high-end audio finishing and mastering. Now, note that in the top left corner, the effects library is going to be specific to effects for audio. Now, one of the really cool things about the audio workstation is you can record directly into Resolve. So I want to show you how to set that up. You're going to need a separate audio track. If you've already brought in some footage, there's probably going to be some audio on track 1, so A2 is probably going to be your empty track. But you could even pull the playhead beyond audio 1 and record there if you want. But just to be safe, it's good to record it on a separate track. Now, if I need to add a new track, I can navigate into this empty space on the left, right-click, and then add track, and add a mono track. So now I'm going to navigate to the mixer on the far right, and I'm going to locate my track I want to record to, and I'm going to give it a new input. So I'm going to go down to the input tab here, select new input, and in the new window that pops up, this is going to allow me to patch in an audio source. So I have a USB microphone, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to make sure the destination is the track I want it to be, and then I'm going to patch it. So now that audio source is connected to this track. So I can close this window now. So now I have to arm the track. So I'm going to go into these set of buttons underneath the track on the left-hand side under the audio track, which I've selected, and I'm going to arm the track. And now we've got some echo going on. So you can see with the levels going up that my audio is working properly. This is why it's always good to use headphones when you're doing audio. Sometimes you just need to take the headphones off so that the audio is not coming out through your speakers. And we're ready to go. So I can just hit record here. And now I can record audio directly into DaVinci. And so what this has done now is it's created a WAV file, and this WAV file will be saved in with the rest of your media in the media pool, wherever you've saved the rest of the assets for your project. A common function you may have to do with audio is what's referred to as normalizing, and that's going to sort of even out the loud and quiet sounds on a track. So for example, if you have an interview and the host or the guest speaks louder than the other, those waveforms are going to be different. And so you might want to even out that audio. You can do this in Fairlight, but you can actually do this in any of the other editing tabs. So in Edit or Cut, and you just right click, and we're going to go to Normalize Audio Levels. And the target level, we do want it to be around -10, especially for voiceover or narration, that kind of a thing. So we would just hit normalize, and that would run through the whole track. And so if we had multiple clips and we selected all of them, it would run that function across all those clips. Now for equalization, this is a little bit different. What we can do is, and making sure that I'm selecting the equalization button that's underneath the track that I want to edit. In this case, I want to go audio 3. So I'll click the equalizer here. And that's going to bring up an equalizer window. So this gives me a lot of different options. I'm not going to go into all the minutia here, but essentially you can lift and move around these points on the audio track to isolate different pitches. So low or high pitch sounds, you can sort of isolate them here and tweak them. So the last thing I'm just going to show on Fairlight is the noise reduction. For animation or any kind of video you might be working on, you might have some pretty good voiceover, but unless it's recorded in a soundproof studio, there's probably going to be some sort of ambient noise on the track. Even if you have a quiet apartment or office, there might be like an air conditioner or something. So it's good to know how to do a basic noise reduction on audio. And what you'll do is on your track in the mixer here, go down to Effects, go to Noise Reduction, and you've got a couple different options. You just go to the noise reduction. You're going to get this pop-up window, and this is going to give you a couple different methods for going through the track. And essentially you're going to click the learn, it's going to go through it, and it's going to try and isolate that noise. So handy function to know.
Okay. All right. Well, let's cap it off. We're going to go into the deliver page. So here we go.
Export your project. So what we're going to do is go to the Deliver tab, and this is where we're going to export our project and render out our final video. So the windows you have here, you've got your render settings on the upper left, the viewport in the upper middle portion of the screen. The render queue shows all the videos ready to be rendered out on the upper right, and in the bottom you have the timeline of the current video. And you can choose to render out the entire timeline, or you can set an in and out range. There's several presets available for social media platforms, and also presets for sending your project to other applications. So here in the custom settings, I'm gonna send, I'm gonna select my file. I'm gonna give my file a name, the destination. Under the video settings, I'm gonna choose this to be a single clip as opposed to rendering out each clip as a separate file. I'm going to export my video with, probably use the QuickTime format. You can also use MP4, but that's gonna limit your codec to just H.264. If you go with QuickTime, you can choose some other codecs. One of which I would recommend is I think it's the DNxHR format. This is like the PC equivalent of Apple ProRes, so you can get really nice quality with that and good color representation. You can set the resolution, really easy to downscale, and it's actually pretty insane that this free software now allows you to export to 4K. That wasn't always the case, but in the newest versions of it, they're letting you export to 4K now. That's pretty awesome. You can also change the frame rate here, but be aware that like your options for the frame rate and resolution are going to be dependent on the project settings that you had available. Now, I'm usually going to check on use optimized media just to be safe in case I was using any low resolution preview screens or optimized media or proxy media earlier. This will ensure that it's always going to grab the highest res source file available. I can also force it to use the proxy media if I want to keep everything low res for something to kick out really quickly. And I can also export my subtitles. Usually this will be in the SRT file format. Generally, it's recommended not to mess with the frame rate or resolution here in the export settings. You probably want to do that in your project settings or the timeline, because if you're doing that at render, it means you're adding calculations to what the render has to do, and that means it could crash, or there might be glitches in your final video, or it'll just take much longer than necessary. But once I'm all satisfied, I'm going to hit add to render queue, and it's going to add it over here on the right side, and then I can just hit render and it'll render out. Now, I've mostly been using MP4. I'll just go straight to an MP4 and kick out 1280 by 720 HD, and with the optimized media checked. Those are the settings I almost always use, and DaVinci renders these things out. It's super quick. It's really impressive. And so while we're here, I'll also talk a bit about sharing your project with other folks. So as I mentioned earlier, DaVinci is unlike other software in that it stores all your projects in an internal database. I'm going to hit Shift-1 to bring up the project manager window here, and here's all my projects. So I can access them through the project manager. Technically, you can find these files if you navigate through a maze of hidden folders. So technically, you can find these files if you navigate through a maze of hidden folders, but they hide these for a reason. If you mess around with these files, you can break DaVinci and have to reinstall the software, so don't do that. If you have to move your project to another computer, you can still produce a file if you have to. So go to File, Export Project, and this will allow you to kick out a DRP file, which is a DaVinci Resolve project file that your collaborators can open. You can also go to Export Timeline, and then that will let you export a DRT file, which is just one timeline out of the project. Then when you're opening this in a new DaVinci workstation, simply go to File, Import, and select the DRP or DRT file. You'll then have to have the project assets in a matching folder structure and relink them. So this is a quick example of opening up an older project where I've since archived the footage, and so I'm going to have to import these. So I'm just going to hover over these clips that are red, which I know that means the link is broken. And I actually don't want to do replace selected clip. I want to make sure I'm doing relink selected clip. Now, if you want to transfer over a project to Premiere, you can select the Premiere XML tab in the render settings. This will render out single or individual clips for each clip in the timeline, and that way you can rebuild a project in Premiere using the exported media and an included XML file. Now that can take a while, so I've already done that ahead of time. I have an example here. This will render out a single movie file for each clip in the timeline and an XML file, which you can then import into Premiere. So if I go to Premiere here, I'm going to open the project. I'm going to grab that timeline XML, open that, and I've got all my clips on my timeline. Linked, and now I can edit in Premiere. Now, if I want to kick something out from Premiere to bring it to DaVinci, I can't open a Premiere project in DaVinci, but I can open those XML files. So from Premiere, I'm going to go to Export, Final Cut Pro XML. That will export an XML file that I can use to import into DaVinci. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to get deeper into learning DaVinci Resolve, one of the best resources out there is a fellow named Alex Jordan. He's got a ton of videos on YouTube and a website called filmsimplified.com. I've also learned a lot of DaVinci Resolve tricks from Casey Ferris. Much of the fusion compositing I learned from Brandon Ark, who's also one of the friendliest YouTubers I've ever encountered. And for general video editing knowledge, check out Kelsey Brennan, also known as Premiere Gal.
Thank you very much for everyone who has powered through and stuck with it. I'm sorry we went a bit late there, but yeah, if there's any last minute questions or anything, feel free to shoot them my way.
Yeah, and as we're getting some comments in, thanks so much. You packed a lot in there, and it was, I mean, I'm so glad that, you know, we have this recording, and that if you're able to post your recordings as well, then we can revisit. And for so generously sharing all your notes. This was a tremendous amount of
No problem.
work
No
in
problem.
putting it together. So thank you very much. If anyone has any last minute questions, as Paul said, we're here for a couple of minutes. Yeah, it kind of makes me want to dip my toes into video editing again. I mean, it's been a while, but it would be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually, I didn't want to get too much into this in the beginning. I was tempted to, but I just wanted to leave it in the script there. I kind of made just like a quick little argument for why it's worthwhile to get into video editing. I know that so much of the folks in our field, what we do is sort of, you know, traditional illustration. So we're a lot of the times working in Illustrator or Photoshop, and there is a good chunk of us that also do animation. And so we're working in 3D rendering. So video is a little bit different than animation, but I think there's huge value here. I mean, it's kind of like my whole career. It's been putting food on the plate for me for over a decade now. I mean, that's what, you know, pays my income. And I think there's huge opportunity for everyone in the field. It is a kind of competitive as if you're looking at video editing as just one job. But I think if you're a biomedical communicator or a medical illustrator armed with video editing knowledge, that can be really valuable. And this program just makes it so accessible. Not necessarily easy. You can tell that there were some, you know, things to kind of try and figure out and navigate through the software, but I do think it's worthwhile to pursue it. And I also think that one of the most powerful things that I've kind of been trying to get into more myself is sharing process, like really actively, and really finding new ways of engaging people on social media by sharing your process. And it's the best way to like just start conversations online, and video is just the perfect way to kind of like package that and deliver that content
Using DaVinci Resolve.
using DaVinci.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. Pleasure to have you. And for everyone who's here, I hope you enjoyed, and hope to see you at the rest of the BMC classes this week.
Oh, absolutely.